Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really foundational idea in economics, comparative advantage. We're going to see how it went from this old school, kind of rigid concept into a super flexible tool that helps us understand our modern, constantly changing global economy. So let's kick things off with a puzzle that has fascinated economists for, well, centuries. Let's say one country could literally make everything faster and better than anyone else. Why on earth would it still make sense for them to trade? The answer is this brilliant and kind of counterintuitive idea. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll start with the classic theory. Then we'll look at the super strict rules it relied on. After that, we'll see how the model got a much-needed dose of reality. And then we'll get into the modern idea of dynamic advantage. And of course, at the end, we'll test what we've learned. Sound good? Let's go. Okay, let's hop in our time machine and go way back to 1817. We're meeting the brilliant economist David Ricardo. He was trying to explain the huge benefits of international trade in a way that was simple but also really powerful. And this was his big idea, comparative advantage. Now here's the key. It's not about being the absolute best at making something. It's about having a lower opportunity cost. In other words, what do you give up to produce it? If you give up less than your trading partners, you have the comparative advantage. By having everyone specialize in what they're relatively best at, and then trading, everybody wins. Everyone ends up with more stuff. It's pretty cool. Now this slide is a great way to visualize Ricardo's original static idea. That solid straight line? That's the production possibility frontier, or PPF. Just think of it as the absolute maximum a country can produce with the resources it has, say wine and cloth. But check out that dotted trade line. This is where the magic happens. By specializing and trading, the country can suddenly consume way beyond its own production limits. That's where those huge gains from trade really come from. But, and this is a big but, to get that beautifully simple straight line model, Ricardo had to make some very strict assumptions. You can think of them as the perfect laboratory conditions needed to make the experiment work just right. So for starters, the model basically hits the pause button on the world. It assumes a country's resources, its land, its people, are totally fixed. Same with its level of technology. It just doesn't change. And it sets up these funny rules for workers, where they can switch jobs super easily within the country, but they can't ever move to another country for work. And the ideal world just keeps on going. The model needs a perfect market where costs never change, literally everyone has a job, and competition is perfect. It also imagines this frictionless world with no government getting in the way with tariffs and, get this, zero transportation costs. I mean, can you imagine? It's a perfect theoretical starting point, but we all know that's not the real world. So obviously, economists knew the world was more complex than that. Over the next century, they realized that to make this model truly useful, they had to start peeling back these strict rules and adding in some real-world messiness. One of the first huge steps forward was to look beyond just labor. You had economists like Heckscher and Olin who came along and said, hey, hold on. A country's unique mix of resources, things like capital, land, and skilled workers, that's a massive part of the story. And that thinking led to the neoclassical model you see here. You can spot the difference right away, can't you? The PPF is a curve now. That curve reflects a real-world fact. The more you try to make of one thing, the costlier it gets. And we also see these community indifference curves, or CICs. That's just a fancy way of mapping out what a country's people actually want to buy. Adding these pieces makes the model feel a lot more real. Then, in the back half of the 20th century, things really took off. A whole wave of new theories popped up to explain things the old models just couldn't. For instance, Paul Krugman's work helped explain why countries might specialize in different versions of the same product, like why Germany and Japan both export cars to each other. The old models had no answer for that. So, all this evolution, all these updates, they bring us to the absolute core idea of today's explainer. This massive shift from seeing advantage as something fixed and static to something that's alive, that's changing, something dynamic. So what exactly is dynamic comparative advantage? The central idea is that a country's strengths aren't just something it's born with. They evolve. A country can actively build new advantages through things like investment, education, and innovation. What you're good at today might not be what you're good at 10 years from now. This chart here really shows that dynamic change in action. As a country's technology improves, or maybe its consumer tastes change, its production point might shift from where A is, and its consumption point might shift from where B is. the entire balance of what it makes, what it buys, and what it trades just finds a whole new equilibrium. So what's causing all these shifts? Well, it's all the messy, real-world stuff that the original model had to ignore. It's the way ideas and new technologies spread across borders. It's global supply chains where parts for one product come from 10 different countries. And it's even the simple reality of shipping costs and imperfect markets.
You know, this sentence might sound simple, but it represents a revolution in economic thinking. It moves us from a world where your advantages are basically inherited to one where they can be strategically built, developed, and cultivated over time.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. We've traced this huge idea from its simple, static origins all the way to its complex, dynamic present. So let's put that new knowledge to the test, shall we? All right, question 1. Based on everything we've talked about, what's a key factor that makes comparative advantage dynamic instead of static? Think back to those real-world forces we just listed. What was one of the big things Ricardo's original model assumed was completely locked in place? Yep, if you were thinking about technological innovation or the spread of new knowledge, you are right on the money. And to wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. If a country's advantage isn't set in stone, what steps could a nation actually take, through its policies, its investments, its education system, to deliberately build a new comparative advantage in a high-tech industry of the future? That question is at the very heart of the power of a dynamic world. Thanks for tuning in.